Have you ever wondered how the magnificent civilization of ancient Egypt came to be? We often hear about the grandeur of the pyramids, the mysteries of the pharaohs, and the incredible advances in art, science, and culture. But what if the roots of Egypt's first dynasties were not entirely Egyptian? What if the origins of this great civilization were tied to an influx of knowledge, culture, and leadership from faraway lands? This is the essence of the dynastic race theory, a controversial idea that has been debated for over a century. Today, we're going to explore this theory in depth, examining the evidence from ancient texts, biblical accounts, and archaeological findings to uncover a story that may change how we understand the founding of Egypt. The dynastic race theory was one of the earliest attempts to explain how Egypt evolved from a collection of scattered communities into a unified, powerful kingdom. The theory posits that this transformation didn't happen organically, but was instead sparked by invaders from Mesopotamia who brought advanced knowledge, technology, and culture to Egypt. These invaders are believed to have established the first dynasty, laying the groundwork for what would become one of the most remarkable civilizations in human history. In the early 20th century, this idea gained significant traction among Egyptologists. It was proposed by Sir William Matthew Flinders Petrie, a pioneer in the field of archaeology who noticed something unusual in the skeletal remains he uncovered at pre-dynastic sites in Upper Egypt. He observed that some skeletons were larger and had a different cranial structure than others, suggesting the presence of two distinct races. Petrie theorized that these larger skeletons belonged to a foreign ruling class that had imposed itself on the native population, bringing with them new technologies, architectural styles, and cultural practices from Mesopotamia. But Petrie's theory wasn't just based on skeletal evidence. He also pointed to other clues: foreign pottery styles, rock carvings of Mesopotamian boats, and the introduction of niched facade architecture, which was common in Mesopotamia but new to Egypt. These findings led Petrie to conclude that these invaders had not only conquered Egypt, but had also introduced the elements that would define the early dynastic period. Other scholars, such as L.A. Waddell and Walter Bryan Emery, supported Petrie's theory. They believed that this foreign elite brought with them the ideas and skills necessary to build the foundations of the Egyptian state, including kingship rituals, metalworking, and monumental architecture. As the 20th century progressed, the dynastic race theory began to lose favor among scholars. By the mid-century, many archaeologists and Egyptologists started to question the idea of a sudden invasion and began to see the development of Egyptian civilization as a more gradual, indigenous process. New discoveries suggested that the achievements of the first dynasty were not the result of an external influence, but rather the culmination of a long period of internal development. The Naqada culture, which predated the first dynasty, showed a clear progression in art, architecture, and social organization that suggested a more homegrown evolution of Egyptian society. The evidence of Mesopotamian influence, while undeniable, was now seen as part of a broader pattern of cultural exchange rather than the result of a direct invasion. Moreover, the theory of Egypt being a hydraulic empire, a civilization built around the control and management of water resources, gained traction. This idea emphasized the role of the Nile River in shaping the political and social structures of early Egypt, suggesting that the rise of the first dynasty was deeply rooted in the local environment and the needs of the people who lived along the river. By the late 20th century, the dynastic race theory had largely fallen out of favor. Most Egyptologists now believe that while there were certainly influences from Mesopotamia, the development of Egyptian civilization was primarily an indigenous process, with external ideas being adapted and integrated into a uniquely Egyptian context. Despite its decline, the dynastic race theory has not been entirely forgotten. In recent years, some scholars have revisited the idea, proposing that there may still be some truth to the notion of a Mesopotamian influence on the founding of Egypt's first dynasties. One of the most prominent proponents of this renewed interest is David Rohl, an Egyptologist and historian who has written extensively on the subject. Roll argues that the sudden appearance of complex state structures, kingship rituals, and monumental architecture in early Egypt is difficult to explain without some form of external influence. According to Roll, there is little evidence of these elements in Egypt before the First Dynasty, suggesting that they may have been introduced by a foreign elite who brought with them the knowledge and techniques developed in Mesopotamia. Roll's theory is supported by several intriguing pieces of evidence. For example, he points to rock carvings found in various locations, from Wadi Abad to Abydos, that depict large Mesopotamian-style boats being pulled across land. These carvings suggest that the invaders may have reached Egypt by sailing around the Arabian Peninsula and then dragging their boats across the desert to the Nile. Roll also highlights the introduction of niched facade architecture in Egypt during the early dynastic period. This architectural style, characterized by recessed panels and decorative niches, is virtually identical to the styles used in Mesopotamia at the time. Roll argues that it is highly unlikely that such a specialized building technique could have been independently developed in both regions at the same time without some form of cultural transmission. Beyond the archaeological evidence, there are also striking literary parallels between the religious beliefs and mythologies of Mesopotamia and Egypt. For instance, both cultures share similar names and concepts for their primeval gods and sacred places. In Egypt, the primeval mound of creation was called the Island of Nun, surrounded by the waters of Nun. This concept bears a strong resemblance to the Sumerian temple of Eridu, known as Nun-Ti, or the Mighty Place, which was also built on an island in a watery environment. The similarities between the Egyptian god Nun and the Sumerian deities Tiamat and Apsu suggest a shared cultural heritage, or perhaps a direct influence from one culture to the other. Furthermore, classical texts and other ancient sources hint at a direct connection between Mesopotamian royalty and the founding of Egypt. The Bible, for example, credits Noah's grandson Misraim with founding Egypt. Misraim's father, Ham, is sometimes associated with the Egyptian god Amun, while Misraim himself is linked to Khnum, another early Egyptian deity. Classical era literature, when paired with Sumerian sources, implied the son and grandson of a Sumerian king subjugated and established the first dynasties of Egypt. We know Noah's Sumerian counterpart Ziusudra and Babylonian counterpart Sisuthros reigned as king of the city Shuruppak just before the flood. Ham, as his son, also known as Cham, and his son Chum, aka Mizraim, were accredited with establishing Egypt in the Table of Nations and various sources. In the writings of Sincellus and Manetho, Mizraim is even identified with Menes, the legendary first king of Egypt, adding further weight to the notion of a connection between the Sumerian and Egyptian dynasties. These connections add weight to the idea that the early dynastic period in Egypt may have been influenced by a foreign elite. So, where does this leave us? The story of Egypt's founding is undoubtedly complex, and the dynastic race theory offers one possible explanation for how this great civilization came to be. While the theory has fallen out of favor among many scholars, the evidence we've explored today suggests that it might be worth reconsidering. The idea that a foreign elite from Mesopotamia played a role in the rise of Egypt's first dynasties is not as far-fetched as it might seem. After all, the Uruk period of Mesopotamia predates the Naqada II period of Egypt by several centuries, and there is ample evidence of Sumerian colonies and influence across a wide area. It's entirely possible that this influence extended to Egypt, helping to shape the early dynastic period and laying the foundations for one of the world's greatest civilizations. While mainstream history may continue to view the development of Egypt as primarily an indigenous process, the connections between Mesopotamia and Egypt cannot be ignored. The story of Egypt's founding is likely more complex and interconnected than we've been led to believe, with influences coming from both within and beyond the Nile Valley. In the end, the origins of ancient Egypt may never be fully understood, but by exploring theories like the dynastic race theory, we can gain a deeper appreciation for the rich and diverse history that shaped this remarkable civilization.